Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 1, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Karen Gedney. Karen, where are you calling in from?
Carson City, Nevada, where everything is blooming finally from getting rid of the snow.
Well, we want to start right off by thanking Carolyn Casey of Coyote Network News, one of my heroines, Shiros, they call them. She's a hero and a Shiro to me, having listened to her on the radio for over 20 years and having her on my podcast a while back. And I heard you on her show the other day and was completely bowled away, just totally inspired. And I know you wanted to mention something about me learning of you through Carolyn and another comment in that regard.
Yes, it's a unique, event in that after I gave the radio show, I got your email, which was wonderful. And then I got an email from a lady who said, "Hey, my sister listened to Carolyn Casey's radio show in California, and she said I should contact you for a hypnotherapy session. And I just wanted you to know that the reason is I have incredible problems sleeping for my memorial of my husband. My husband was shot with his two family members in Georgia. And my husband and I have always been against the death penalty. And now I'm all torn up about not only the memorial service, the death of my husband, that I can't sleep. And my sister said, "Wow, you live in Genoa, which is next to Carson. Call up the lady. Maybe she can help you before you do the memorial thing, which is this week, coming
Yeah.
up." And so she contacted me. And yesterday she came over. I did hypnotherapy on her. And actually, she contacted me this morning and said that she had slept that night, which was great. I mean, great. But uniquely, since I'm a prison doctor, since she knew I was against the death penalty, it was all these unusual sequence of events. And that really came out of Carolyn's radio, where a sister hears it and then calls her sister, and then she's, in my house. So that was great.
It's a beautiful story, and it's how radio reverberates and how all these mediums can connect humans. The first question, Karen, is what is the best thing for a human being?
To be alive, relevant, and vital.
Yeah. What is your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
When I was younger, it was absolutely books. I adored books. But now I have to admit, I really enjoy podcasts and Audible books, because then I can do two things at one time, which I love, which is learning and then also hiking or working out in the gym.
Beautiful. Just to divert on books for a second, did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to read, two, they were an example reading, or
you broke up a little bit, but what I understood was, being a reader, my parents didn't in any way force me. It was a unique circumstance. When I grew up, they didn't realize I was unbelievably nearsighted, so I could not see anything at a distance. And when I looked at a book, because this focal length was what I could see, then I could like dive into that. And I must say, books were what sort of inspired me to become a doctor. I had never even met a doctor. It was the books who had done it. Frank G. Slaughter's books, by the way, a guy who wrote back in the 50s, who was a surgeon who wrote these incredible stories, I was a kid reading it. They were meant for adults, but they were fiction. And it was about doctors through different periods of history, like buccaneer surgeon
Yeah.
of the Roman legion. And I was fascinated, and I thought, that's what I want, a life of helping, but it's also adventure and romance and intrigue. I had no idea what a real doctor was up to, but that's what got in my brain at probably 8 or 9 years old. I told my parents I want to be a doctor, and neither one of my parents had ever even gone to high school, so and that had to do with World War II. Uh, and they just looked at me and patted on my head and said, "That's nice, but you're on your own." And at
Well,
18, you're out of the house. You're gone.
yeah, yeah, that's our generation. You're out at 18.
Right.
Karen, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think humans are absolutely innately curious, and that curiosity is what drives them to accumulate information about everything and anything. And also, because of that curiosity, they are asking questions of why. You can see it in a little 2 or 3 year old. They're already acquiring things. That never stops. And I think if it does stop, people deteriorate.
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
I would say yes, they do, but also emotions absolutely create thoughts. So it's a circle.
Yeah. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
I don't know what I think until it pops in my head and makes sense to me. Otherwise, I delete it immediately.
It pops in my head. That is good and makes sense. That's
Right.
good.
Yeah. If it doesn't make sense, I delete it before it like gets tentacles in there.
Can humans think without language?
To me, yes, they can.
Yeah. Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, I had a lot of that in the prison, what I was taking care of, because there were, let's say, certain inmate populations where they didn't want to hear anything I said. They just wanted what they wanted, sort of like a 2 year old. And I found that the best thing was to listen and to um, be there with them till they calmed down, so they felt heard. Because if they're
Yeah,
not heard first, they don't take information in.
it's really
And you have to
yeah,
care. I mean, truly care. It can't be, what should I say? You're just doing it out of
yeah.
habit. No, you actually have to care. And I cared about the inmate population, and I was also curious about. I was very fortunate that I had the curiosity gene instead of the judging gene.
Yeah. I love that they felt heard, which fits the next question perfect. Your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
We're feeling beings first, and then we rationalize how we feel with how we decide who and what to think about.
Yeah. These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I'm not really clear on the status of the soul because I didn't really grow up with religion, so I wasn't inculcated with that everyone had a soul. Um, I certainly think there's some sort of essence people have, and uh, and then when they're gone, that essence is not present, at least in the spot they were when they died. I've seen a lot of people die, and when they die, whatever there was is gone.
Yeah. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
It all depends what you mean by think, but machines can certainly be programmed to go through different steps that have a logical sequence. And many people think in that way explicitly. So it depends how you define thinking.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I like to tell myself that I'm going for meaningful things that make me happy.
Yeah. Very good. I'm really loving this time, Karen. I love how articulate you are, and you know to have fun at this too. You're really grounded. I really look up to you. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more detecting it or more creating it?
I've always had the sense that consciousness is bubbling there, and then we are looking at it and thinking, wow, I'm conscious. I mean, uh, I really didn't get into meditation until much later in life because I sort of didn't have the time or sort of got into that arena. But when I started meditating, and it took me a while to calm down, let's say, the chatter of monkeys that was swirling around up there. But when I did, I realized it's very much like something's boiling and there's little bubbles coming up. And then as an outsider, I'm looking and thinking, okay, that's interesting. Where did that come up from? And also realizing that I didn't have to chase it. It could just bubble up and, you know, effervescent and it's gone.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I've never seen people measure the speed of thought, so I have no idea.
The poet Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." A colleague of hers, Yvonne Rainer, said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
Wow. I think right now the interesting tool that's out there that people are talking about and that I am a bit fascinated by is artificial intelligence, the
Yeah.
AI. And just out of curiosity, I put I got a little app, with AI, which is called Brain, just out
Yeah.
of curiosity, right? But I have to share with you, I decided I'm going to ask the 5 things it knows about Karen Gedney, MD, all right?
Wow.
Because I'm a curious person. So the 4 things they came up with were absolutely they got off the internet. You know what I mean? Like Dr. Gedney was a
Yeah.
prison doctor who wrote this book, blah, blah. Okay, the 5th one was like absolutely not true, but also I thought, where the hell did they get that from? Okay, and it basically said, all right, it said Dr. Gedney in 2016 got the prestigious psychiatric award in the United States or something. And I'm like, where'd that come from? So, I mean, it's for me, tools are to, uh, well, sort of experiment with first and
Yeah.
decide whether they're going to be useful. But that has been, so I will ask it certain questions. uh, this is an example where actually on Friday, I'm giving a talk where I'll be speaking about the value of sleep and the value of meditation. And out of curiosity, I asked the AI, give me the 15 reasons that meditation is good for health. And it went, "Bloop, bloop, 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 bloop." And there it got it right. You see what I mean? I
Wow. That's
wanted to see if it like made it up, right? I mean, like where it's pulling it from and how it, and also how it articulates the answer. I mean, it's extremely far better than I thought. But like I said, if you Google yourself, I mean, or you ask AI about you, who knows what will come up, you know?
well, that was a good update. I appreciate that. And what new toy do you suggest?
What new toy? Well, the toy would be pick a favorite app that has
Yeah,
something to do with AI and just experiment with it.
yeah.
Experiment with it. And also realize it is not necessarily accurate, but it can be informative. And also what it, when they say, wow, AI sometimes is hallucinating, and I'm wondering, okay, they're already anthropomorphizing a tool.
That is, I haven't even heard about hallucinating
Yeah.
AI. That's really important. You're teaching me a lot. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I am not a worrier, so I don't really worry about anything. And fortunately, I have to say, when I was a doctor and on call in the prison like every other day at nighttime for 30 years, now that I'm out of the prison and I can go to sleep, I am so happy that no
No,
one's going to wake me up. I mean, I couldn't be happier. Like I just go, I mean, within 10 seconds, I'm out. And if something's bubbling in my mind, I my little habit is I think of a couple of things I'm grateful for in the day. I never get past 3 or 4 and I'm out. So,
that's nice. Beautiful. Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Karen, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
well, I think for most people, either it's one, they don't have the ability to, what should I say, imagine. They're not imaginative enough to, or some people may be very conservative in terms of things happening too fast or fears that are
Yeah,
generated uh, when things change drastically. I mean, humans are a bit used to comfort and
yeah.
patterns. So when everything really gets thrown upside down, that makes them discombobulated, and especially the older they are.
Really well put. And do artists have moral obligation?
It always depends what you mean by moral obligations. Now, I think that there's a spectrum. If they are promoting things with the absolute intention to severely harm and kill other people, I think there should be a line that's drawn. But
Yeah.
if the intention is to make them aware of art can create this as like a wake-up call, then it's relevant and worthwhile. So to me, it's the intention behind it.
Beautiful. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Well, I'm hoping that the old ideas are the worst ones because I hope humans have learned to get rid of some of them, like burning women who would be someone like me, a healer as a witch, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm glad some of those old rules are gone.
Yes. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
My earliest memory ever. Oh, yeah, I can. My sister and I talk about this, right? Because it was a bit dramatic for us. I don't know, like 5 or 6 or so, but my sister and I were outdoorsy kids, and I had climbed up to a very high tree, and I sat on a branch, and it fell. I mean, it broke, so I went, "Meow," splat. And my sister's a year younger, right? So I'm unconscious. But my sister and I already realized at that age that if my sister went home and told my mother that I was dead or unconscious, she would be beaten. Okay. Because my mother's response when anything out of the ordinary happened, like we were hurt or something, she overreacted and punished us, right? So my sister just poked me with a stick for a couple of hours before I came to. And we never told my mother. We never told my mother. But it's like one of these memories in us where we look back and think, wow, we were already indoctrinated with the fear of ever telling our mother we were hurt. I mean, once we were in a car accident when we were teenagers, and we sort of hid it when we were in sports and really sprained something bad or whatever. We hid it.
Yeah.
The only thing my sister couldn't hide was one time she was playing baseball with a guy, and he threw so hard it fractured her nose. So the next week she looked like a raccoon. We couldn't hide that one. And my mother went off the deep end.
But Karen, I love just how you told the story was so articulate, and I visioned it so well that I see your sister there poking you like
Yes,
every 10
yes.
minutes. Okay. I think you're gonna get up like 2 hours of poking you and then 5
Yeah,
hours.
that's how scared she was to go.
Yeah, right. Well, this goes along with it. Tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
Wow. Well, there's all different types of impact. In my family, my parents had significant impact on my sister and I. Uh, but I'm going to go for my paternal grandmother.
Yeah,
Okay, Erika Stichhorst. Okay,
yeah,
and she was a product of a Dutch sea captain and an illegitimate, no, a dressmaker and an illegitimate count. You know, like she was
yeah,
an illegitimate child of a count and a
yeah,
dressmaker. All right, so she's German, and she lived in the United States. And when I got to know her, she was not a loving grandmother. You know what I mean? One
yeah,
of these people. And I remember where she was a Seventh day Adventist, okay, because at that time, I guess she was in New York City, and there was a church, Seventh day Adventist. And I remember asking her, well, there's all these different religions. I sort of knew. And I said, well, why are you a Seventh day Adventist? And she said, well, they have the best social club. And as a kid, I thought, well, that's a little odd, you know, 'cause I thought people in the religious sector were because they believed in, you know, certain religious things, right? So she was all about the social connection. And then this I found out the Seventh Day Adventists didn't eat like shellfish or pork or meat,
yeah,
or they were sort of vegetarians. And then I asked my grandmother, I said, well, good God, Grandma, you're eating liverwurst for heaven's sake on rye bread, right? And she goes, well, I don't believe any of that stuff. So she made an impact on me, not necessarily in a good way in terms of my concepts about religion, right?
yeah,
Right. And then also sort of the hypocrisy.
yeah.
So that probably dulled my interest a lot in religions, right?
Yeah, that was a good example of an impact. Now, outside your immediate family, someone.
Oh, well, outside, you know, I so in when I think back in terms of impact in school, I in seventh grade, they sort of test you. This is in upstate New York. And in those days, they tested the seventh graders. There were like 300 in our class. And they had this idea, well, we want to experiment. We're going to test them, and we're going to test them in mathematical skills. And then we're going to take like the top, whatever, 2% or something. So they picked 8 kids out of the 400. I was the only girl and 7 boys. And they said, oh, we have what we're going to do to like nudge you further is we're going to skip, you know, 8th grade for you, and we're going to put you directly into algebra. Okay, so I ended up failing my first test ever in my life, which just like really traumatized me because nobody told me what a variable yet was, or anything. And then I rose to the occasion because I did not want to fail any more tests. And I got 100 on the midterm. And then every ninth grader hated my little guts. You know what I mean? Right. But the mentor that affected me, uh, and this was not good because here I am, I go through that, then they call you in, you're in 8th grade, whatever, the guidance counselor, and this guidance counselor guy, he's like, well, what do you think you want to do and what do you want to become? And I said, oh, I want to become a doctor. And he looked at me like, wouldn't you rather be a nurse?
Oh
Okay.
my
Right.
God.
Now, mind you, and I had been the only female in my entire class who got accelerated and blew him away with my math ability. And then he said that to me. And so this is my problem because I remember this very intensely. And I thought that is the last time I will ever ask anyone to be a mentor or a helper or ask for anything.
Yeah.
So that really blunted me later in life because I never sought out a mentor, in school or a professor. I never asked a professor for help. I became highly resilient, which made it infinitely harder. And I missed a lot of stuff because I never, you know, asked. But that
Yeah.
guy affected me.
Wow. So articulate. Thank you, Karen. And you talked about religion a little. Do you pray?
No, I don't pray, but I definitely send out thoughts like, "Please, I hope this works." If there's good thoughts, I wanna send out good thoughts. Or
Yeah.
if it's people who are sick, it's like, I send thoughts that I really want you to be well,
Yeah.
but I'm not praying to an authority figure
Yeah.
because that's nebulous to me.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there's energy and thoughts are definitely, and humans definitely have electrical fields. So to me, thoughts and that are for other people or you want certain things to go well for yourself, that sort of makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And plus, I don't want to bother someone. See, this is the mentor. I don't want to bother anyone in a position
Ah,
either.
you have ESP right and left because that's the next question, stupid. But if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
He probably would have said, "What's the matter with you, Karen? Why did you ever ask for anything?"
Karen, do evil people exist or does evil use people as a vehicle?
You know, a lot of people ask me about evil because I have taken care of, for years, serial killers and what societies consider the worst of the worst, and I don't believe in evil.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not people who, for whatever reasons, do evil acts,
Yeah.
okay? Despicable acts, horrible acts, traumatic things. But I I look at the whole picture, and especially being in the medical field and watching really that population for 30 years, what I see is these individuals who have done some horrible evil acts, they if you look at their eyes, right, you realize that whatever spark that connected them to people, not there.
Yeah.
Like dead fish eyes, it's not there.
Yeah.
And so many of them were, what should I say, thrown away as children, and in whatever circumstances, they did not really connect with humans.
Yeah.
And so, and then, of course, a lot had head injuries, and that affects whatever in the brain, whether it's the amygdala, your prefrontal cortex, whatever. But you have enough trauma to your brain, you don't think right, and then your emotional system may be offline. So
Yeah.
small things can just, you know, you
Yeah.
do things. Um, and when you look at movies and like, ooh, evil, those things creep me out. That I don't,
Yeah.
that doesn't work for me. Like
That's,
people who enjoy horror films and evil things, I'm like, no, I'm more interested in what happened to this poor brain, and
yeah.
also what can we do medically or psychologically or at a society level so we don't end up with so much damage.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. In fact, the question is really, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I would say yes, in that if you have an enemy, and I can give an example. I had enemies in the prison because if you have people who run a prison and they are only oriented to shame and punish and step on someone's neck, and then you have someone like me, and I was put in the prison by the federal government because they were under huge lawsuits.
Yeah.
All right. So, in my second year, let's say one of my enemies, uh, who I found out about in my first year, was the associate warden of the prison. So he's second in command in the prison. Okay. And he his wife was the director of the nursing. So you have this nepotism going on, which is a power structure. Then you toss me in, who's like totally oblivious to this, and they became my enemies. They created an investigation on me, which the director, like the entire state of the prison, um, he found out about it because it went to him. They got the inspector general involved, so it went to him. And when I heard I was being investigated, I'm like, no one's telling me anything. So I went directly to the top. He had me come over, and he had this stack of paper and he put them in front of me and he said, I want you to read this so you know your enemy, so you get them before they get you. And I'm thinking, what kind of place am I? Right? Really. And then I said, well, if these people are so bad, why don't you do something? He goes, I
Right.
can't. They got something on me. I'm like, this is not good. But a year later, when they couldn't get rid of me, that guy, I still believe, I don't know for sure, but he could have prevented me from being held hostage. So I was held hostage. And in that event, I was assaulted, raped. They got me out with concussion grenades. They shot the inmate a few feet from me. And then that was Friday the 13th, and I go back to work on Monday. Now I have this issue, right? I have a sort of known enemy who, it seems, has put my life to get me out of the prison or killed. You see what I mean, right? And I realized that if I acknowledged him, like fought, right? I would be like attaching like a ball and chain to me and that guy, right? And plus, I wasn't 100% sure that he
Yeah.
allowed it to happen. You see what I mean? So I ended up, in my mind, I knew I had to forgive that guy and forgive the inmate so I could function like I always want to function, which is not with a ball and chain on me. Now I have to admit, you know, there's one thing about forgiving, it's something different about forgetting, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to be still smart enough not to get stuck again. He was transferred later to a whole different prison. And when I left the prison, and he had died of lung cancer, in my book, I changed all the names, but I made it very clear in my book who that enemy was. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I didn't forget,
Yeah.
but he's dead. So that's sort of irrelevant for him.
Well, I think you bringing up the word forgive is so important. In fact, American Indians, indigenous say your enemy's your best teacher. And Ram Dass says, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. It's like you could say, I'm having a real hard time loving that person. But, what impressed me was hearing the story, how you forgive in the roots of how you learned how to forgive. And I think forgiving is the key, but it's easy to talk about it, but it's hard to do it. We want to hang on to things. And just before you talk about where you got this sense of how important to forgive is I love Mark Twain, who said, forgiveness is the smell the flower releases when the foot steps on it. And so it's like, what is the roots of you learning forgiveness? How did you get that in your life? And it just comes across as something that you really uphold, that you think forgiveness is important.
Yeah, I absolutely feel it's important. And I think it's because I saw people who did not forgive, and they literally became a prisoner with their own thoughts and issues, and it limited them. And I did not want to be stuck and limited and having to deal with it all the time, because if you forgive, then you don't have to deal with it. Plus, with the inmate population, as their physician, um, they had lots of issues, psychological issues, and a lot of it was anger over XYZ. And I was constantly trying to get across to them through stories and metaphors and anything I could do to, let's say, get them on the path of not getting stuck in the rut.
Yeah.
It's sort of like revenge, where I would tell the guys, look, there's a great Japanese quote: if you want to kill somebody and have revenge, dig 2 graves.
Wow.
Okay. And they got that. I mean, that I have to do simple metaphors for my inmates, but they understood, because that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
And and so here I am. I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I'm teaching them to forgive. So I was already, sort of wired already, multiple times, just doing it with my guys.
But Karen, it even goes back to your mom, the fear you and your sister have.
Right.
Did
And
you forgive her? I mean, where did you get this? Did you get it from your dad, the way your grandmother, your
no,
early life? Where did you learn this importance of forgiveness?
I'm not exactly sure. Certainly not my grandmother. That'd be a no. But and my father was, a bit of more the stoic type, so I didn't really get that from him. But I would say, even though my mother, what happened is I came to the realization that my mother uh, was a product of the Second World War, right? She grew up in Kolberg, which was then that area of Germany given to Poland after the war. And she was a young girl, basically. Um, like when she was in seventh grade, her life ended, basically. Yeah. And so her mother and 8 children ran from the Russians, freezing, uh, starving, being bombed, being in a prisoner war camp in Russia for a while. So she just lived through horrendous times. And she ultimately got to the US, the first in her family to get to the US. And um, I came to realize that her fears, she just overreacted with her fears. And
Yeah.
I think partially watching that made me think, like, well, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to overreact to fears, which is sort of like when people said, oh my God, you're going into prison. Aren't you afraid? No, to me, I thought it was an adventure.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
Yeah.
and and maybe I've been a bit cavalier with danger, but I think I got desensitized just watching her, like, "Ooh, I don't wanna act like that."
Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. Frank Zappa has a great line. He said, "Don't do speed; it will turn you into your parents." And it's like, in my opinion, you don't have any choice. Everyone turns into their parents in a way, in a metaphorical way.
Yeah, yeah,
But if your parent is this way, you might observe them and say, I don't want to be that way. So
yeah.
that is what you sort of did. Now, you brought up some key words, and Nassim Taleb says games were created to give non heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really wins or loses, but you can tell who a hero is. When I told someone this, they said villains don't think they're bad, they want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bates, in the anthropologist, said, when a criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts. You can go wherever you want, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
I think punishment, is not effective if you really wanna change human behavior. If you
Yeah.
really wanna change human behavior, you need to be on the front end where you prevent the types of things that cause people to do criminal acts or immoral acts or whatever society has issues with. What I see in what I really saw in the prison is, the United States, of course, is the mass incarcerator of the world, and it really spiked up in the late '70s with the war on drugs, the mandatory minimum sentences and all these different things, and you have a prison industrial complex which is making money off of it, and then you have politicians realizing, "Wow, we could really, uh, get elected if we say get tough on crime and etc." And the system is highly unjust. And I was, I must say, clueless about the criminal justice system until I was thrown into it and realized, wow, this really makes no sense whatsoever. Because if you take someone who's has poor behavior and then for years, you show them even worse behavior by staff, by other inmates, and disconnect them from things that could help them,
Yeah.
then you're going to toss them out more of a liability than an asset. I used to tell my guys, man, I don't want you to be a pain in the ass, when you get thrown out. Uh,
Yeah.
and one of the things I did was I developed a life skills course. I initially was asked to do a substance abuse class for them in the camp, which started it all. And I thought, wow, okay, I'm not an addict. Why me? And then I realized this is crazy. Here I am, a doctor, and I was really never taught about addiction. I mean, that's just
Oh,
nuts, right? I
yeah,
mean, it's nuts. And then the people who are helping addicts are ex-addicts. I mean, it's like, okay, that's a little weird to me. I
yeah,
mean, you see what I mean, right?
oh yeah,
And of course, they can help to a certain extent, but you don't you want people who have never had problems with addiction and to understand why they don't have problems and how they deal with all sorts of things in their life and don't turn to drugs, right? And if they tried a drug or never sucked into it, you know, I grew up, I mean, really, I mean, I never even smoked a cigarette. I mean,
yeah.
my mother told my sister and "I'd rather see you dead than use a drug," and she meant it. So,
Wow.
she really meant it, and I don't know, but it plus, the whole concept of a drug made no sense to me
Yeah,
because I had an uncle, a German uncle who survived 3 years in a prisoner of war camp in Russia where he only ate bed bugs and, some rotten tomatoes or something for 3 years. So that guy, he was an alcoholic, and all what I had to see was what alcohol did to behavior to realize,
yeah,
you know, you lose control, this is not acceptable, and that's alcohol, let alone the drugs that were floating around in the '60s, you know?
yeah,
So, um I think there's a whole different way to approach changing human behavior. And punishment, prisons were considered punishment because humans, if you ostracize them out of the social group, that's one of the greatest punishments there is to a human.
yeah,
But what a fallout because that person being ostracized, the victims are also their families, their
yeah,
children, their mothers, etc., and putting women in prison, wow,
yeah,
uh, for these, things that are
yeah,
drug related are really bad because then the kids, what happens to them? They go into the foster
yeah,
systems, the women go all to pot. It's it needs to be revamped. And when I left the prison, I wanted a foot in two worlds, still try to do something in the prison reform world and then something still in the medical world, So I'm just not very good at, doing the split.
well, it seems if you've done a lot, and I wanted to just go back because on the Venice boardwalk, I hang out with a lot of homeless people, and some of them spend a lot of time in prison. And one guy was like, spent more than 3/4 of his life in prison. I says, is it like HBO, cell phones, and the drugs of your choice? And he goes, yeah, sometimes it is. And you're right there with them, and you experience that. So I'm curious your thoughts. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
It can be a productive emotion when there is a real significant threat to your person. And I think that emotion is a survival emotion. But people get angry over the stupidest things. He said that
Yeah,
he cut in line in front of me. He disrespected me. He,
yeah,
it's like, yeah. And so to me, anger is, I've seen it where it is insult, idiocy, threat. But to me, the only way that anger makes sense to me is a true significant threat, and that anger is only to mobilize you,
yeah,
you know, versus you don't freeze,
yeah,
right?
yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree. Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I I definitely believe people should live life, but to me, humans are innate storytellers and they love stories.
Yeah.
And they love to be amused and they love to be taught and they love to experience new feelings and emotions. And there's nothing like stories to do it. PowerPoint and bullet points won't do it for them.
Yeah. And a great experimental filmmaker, Hollis Frampton, said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
I can forget to die when I'm having a lot of fun.
I'm so glad you knew, because that's a hard question to ask, because people usually go, what? Because they're not sure whether to take it literally or metaphorically. And you have this big picture view. I appreciate that. In fact, you've talked about how your progress through your career a lot online and in your book. So
Yes.
we can go into it, but I sort of want to carry on. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you wrote your book, what role did intention play in your creative process?
It played a huge part because my intention was to have the outside world see the inside world of the prison through the eyes of a healer instead of what they usually see, which is on one side the captive or the captor, but you don't really see the story and the perceptions of someone who is oriented to understand and heal and support. And in fact, when I left, some people ask, why'd you write a book? And when I was a doctor and some people would say, hey, what happened today? And I would tell them some bizarre thing. They would go, oh my God, Kara, you got to write a book. You got to write a book.
Yeah.
So all those 30 years, I sort of kept a journal and,
Yeah.
there were just certain things that I just had to write down because they were so wild. So, but my intention was to let the outside world see that world that's really closed to most people's eyes, unless you're an inmate or a guard.
Yeah. Well,
And so,
well, you sort of answered it, but I have to ask it anyways.
yeah.
Marcel Duchamp said, there's no art without an audience. How much were you thinking of your reader when you were writing your book?
I was twofold. One, I had to say the book was a bit of a psychotherapy session for me doing it. But the other thing was I really wanted the reader to see the spectrum of the prison. So my book has 30 chapters and it really goes from the day I enter to the day I leave, but they see the trajectory, but each chapter could stand on its own. And I was writing it for what I felt people were interested in, like, ooh, what about a serial killer? Ooh, what about a child molester? Ooh, what about the AIDS epidemic? Whatever, you know what I mean? I was thinking about the audience and what they would be interested in, and what were the things that enabled me to survive on the inside, or what I enjoyed, or whatever.
Yeah, Karen, what really intrigues me too is someone told me about their dad was a doctor and he always held the hand of his patient.
Mhm.
And it was so touching to hear that. And nowadays that might, like, hey, don't touch, it could be a different situation. But you have this sense growing up of what a doctor does, and you chose that as your calling,
Right.
your practice. Then you do 30 years in the prison. Then you write a book. Now you're also a public speaker. And this is what really intrigues me, is how articulate you are. You're not really required to be really articulate as a doctor or as a book writer in regards to public speaking. So how did that morph? Was that something that was rooted in the way you were raised, this sense of being articulate and, talking to the public?
I would say it was not the way I was raised, because in fact, I had problems because my mother, who was German, she spoke English, but she used a lot of words that were German because she liked him better. For example, get the Waschlappen, which means the dishwasher, right? I mean, like, du hast Schmutz, on your shirt or whatever, or like, ein Hemd is a fuzzles. For years, I thought I didn't even know the word lint. I knew fuzzle, right? so I sort of was screwed up articulately by my mother's, and also the Germanic grammar is bizarre, because I notice sometimes when I write, or my sentence structure, you put all the verbs on the end, right, in German,
Oh
which,
my God.
right, it's like not good. But what helped me be a better speaker, believe it or not, was the prison, because when I taught the inmates, first of all, I'm in a culinary which has horrible acoustics. I got 30 or 40 guys who are only there because my classes would give them meritorious credits, which means some credits off their sentence. Plus, they're bored and they can look at a tall blonde female, which they don't see all that often, too. And I had, you know, this is the prison world where the whites were sitting up front, the meth addicts were way in the back, the blacks are at each entrance to escape. You got them all in their own little patches. And I had to hold their attention for an hour.
Right.
Right. And to do that, I have to speak in a certain way that captures their interest, but also gets information across in a way that's not too excessive or wordy, or I'm talking with vocabulary that they don't know. And stories are the things that they would understand. And I
Yeah.
became a storyteller.
That is so amazing, because I've also talked to a lot of teachers, people in education, and they say, well, we're not taught public speaking. They don't really teach you. You have to almost give a performance,
Right.
and you have to learn that on the spot by your own time. You don't, it's not something that you go. In fact, this is a McLuhan line that I'm curious. It's misleading to suppose there's any difference between education and entertainment. However, it's always been true, whatever pleases teaches more effectively.
Absolutely.
So it's like, how do you realize what pleases when you haven't been taught like live storytelling skills? You're like put in there, and then all of a sudden you're in the prison. You go, I've got to do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say that the things that I loved to talk about, imagine if you're an inmate, you always hear the worst of the worst. And the guards would always be like, oh, Joe's back and he screwed up. And it was always negative. My talks were very much oriented about the positive things. And also, I love to tell them about successes, sort of the hero's journey, Joe
Yeah.
Campbell's stuff, that
Yeah.
world. And then what I would also do is, because I love to read books, I would read books and then I would synopsis it for them so they have a little
Yeah.
handout. But then I would talk to them about who Da Vinci was, right?
Yeah.
And what he did and his foibles and just the storyline. And
Yeah.
they loved that stuff because it was positive, which is not something they didn't hear. And then some of them became interested enough to say, "Hey, Gedney, can I have that book?" So I would donate it to their little library. And then it was even better. I would have guys come up, "Gedney, can you give us a dictionary so we can figure out some of these words?" I mean, that's wonderful, right? I didn't shove it down their throat. They came to me.
That is really powerful. In fact, bringing up Joe Campbell was important to me because he was deep into a book we study called Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. And McLuhan got everything he knew from Finnegan's Wake and said that and not to sound elitist, but everybody has this amazing ability to create these scenarios while we're sleeping, dreaming. And he said, what Finnegan's Wake is about is dreaming awake, that artists dream awake. Have dreams played a role in your creative process? Being a doctor, writing a book, being a public speaker, and just dealing with this scenario of prison for 30 years.
Well, I would have odd dreams because when you deal with lots of medicine, bad stuff, and then you deal with the prison and the two things mixed together in a dream, let me tell you, those are dreams that I don't really like because they're not good dreams. And then I wake up and think, whoa, wait a second. That felt very uncomfortable. I would have dreams that I was put into prison and I'm trying to convince him I'm innocent, and it feels so real. Those dreams are not good. And then when I was held hostage, uh, the inmate who took me hostage told me, when he was, raping me and stuff, he said, "I'm Hades and you're Persephone, and I'm going to pull you down into the underworld with me." So I had a nightmare, the worst nightmare of my life, because it was so real. I was like half awake and half in a nightmare. And I felt like he was pulling my arm, like, I was coming off the bed and pulling me down into the underworld. And it was so awful when I truly woke up because my husband was next to me and I was screaming. I thought, never again am I going to have that dream. And thank God I didn't. That'd be the worst thing to go around in a circle on that one. But dreams for me, I usually wake up and I go, God, why did my brain stick these weird things
Yeah.
together? Right. But not so much that they inspired me to really write. I lived uh, my days in the prison. I didn't have to go home and watch TV. You see what I mean? Or
Yeah.
think of odd things because just the most oddest and funniest or most dangerous or wildest nitwit stuff happened every day in the prison.
Yeah.
I didn't have to amuse myself. I had to make sure my dreams didn't go off the deep end. That's what happened with me.
Karen, what do you think the motive of the cave artist was?
The motive. Well, uh, I think that for certain that because humans are creative and maybe they were storytellers and wanted to depict some of the story, I think it probably came out of storytelling. Like, let
Yeah.
me tell you about this buffalo I killed or this mastodon that stepped on my foot. He sort of looked like like this. I think it came out of storytelling.
Yeah. In two of my film heroes, their mantras, George says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self expression. And Cecil Taylor, the jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Well, I think it's both, but I think the artists um, are expressing themselves as well as expressing the culture or against the culture they're in.
Yeah. Can art making be egoless?
Um, Probably not 100%.
Yeah.
I think there is going to be some ego attached to it. And I did want to share this with you, Jerry. In my book, every chapter, I have artwork from an inmate, you see.
I, yeah.
All right. But I want to show something to you. I actually have my book here, but I wanted to show this to you to see if you can see it. So you see this picture, how it's scribble art? Whoopsie.
Yes. Yes.
Right. All right. Yeah. Scribble art. I don't know what I'm doing here, but
Hey,
so,
you did. That's good right there. But yeah,
okay.
in
The
there.
scribble art. Okay. Now, this was done by an inmate, and this is what the inmate who took me hostage was called Moth. And you
Yeah.
see how the artist put the sort of moth on his face, but it looks
Yeah.
like horns. The first time I saw it, I thought, "Oh my God, he made it look like the devil." And then I
Yeah.
realized, "Oh no, that's a moth on his face." So the guy who is the artist, he did 27 years in the prison. And this is a great story for me in that um, he was out of the prison when I started writing the book, and his mentor, who taught poetry and creative writing in the prison, Sean Griffin, is the poet laureate for the state of Nevada.
Wow.
Okay, so this teacher really, really mentored this young Hispanic guy because this young Hispanic guy is a great poet. He's a published poet now, and a great artist. I mean, he can do whatever acrylics and oils and scribble art and pointillism or whatever, all these art things. And I reached out to the inmate who was now in the outside for the last 7 years, and I said, "Hey, Izzy, I'm going to give you a sentence or two of the chapter because you were there during all this time. You know the essence of the feeling." And I said, "Just do whatever art thingy you think for the essence of the chapter." And he really hit a home run on almost all of them.
Yeah.
Um, and when he left the prison, the poet laureate guy did a GoFund thing. So last summer, Izzy graduated with a master's in fine arts and creative writing from Antioch in Los Angeles.
Nice.
You see, so those are the stories I love to tell, right?
Yeah.
And so he wrote, I forget, well, he has a poetry book like Devils and Angels or something, but he's a very good poet as well, Ismail Santianes.
Yeah. There's your website is excellent. And we link to it. And there's some great videos where you show the artwork and talk about it. I
Right.
really appreciate it. Karen, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, I really appreciate compromise because I think humans will always have the issue of individual versus group rights. And if you can't compromise, then you are going to destroy each other. And people that have a conviction so strong that they will not listen to new information scares me, actually.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the word rights. What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Well, I think humans have to have basic rights to ever even consider being responsible to either themselves or the group mentality. Because if you don't give a person basic rights, then uh, to me, you shouldn't expect that they're going to be responsible to the group that's withholding those rights.
What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Rebellion is fighting against something that they have an issue with, but a revolution is having the vision what they're fighting for.
Yeah. You re-evolved revolution. I'm curious about this word blame. And there's a scene in the movie Grapes of Wrath where, you know, the guy drives to the farmer's land and he knows him and he says, Joe, you have to leave this land because they're going to put a road here. And he's holding a gun and he says, my grandfather farmed this land, my dad farmed this land, and I farmed this land. Who do I shoot? You know,
Right.
it's is this thing blame innate or invented? Is it in us innately, or did humans invent blaming?
Well, I think humans innately understand injustice. I mean, even chimps understand injustice. They've done those great experiments where you give one little chimp guy the good grape, the other one the raisin, and the and the guy who got the raisin is going to throw it at you. They know injustice,
Yeah.
and so I think that with the concept of injustice, they want to lash out and blame someone.
Yeah.
So I think it's innate.
Yeah. Is loyalty based on reason?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that can be dangerous for humans.
Yeah.
And you see that in the, let's say, the mafia families or people that are loyal to religions that may be doing things that are nefarious. I think they should always temper everything with reason.
Yeah. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
My inner dialogue, sometimes I have to smack it around because it's a little bit extra critical of me. And that's my money.
I love that. You got to smack your inner dialogue.
Because I realize, okay, when I'm like critical of myself for whatever reason, that inner voice, I realize, okay, that's coming from my mother. So that inner dialogue I have to be aware of, and then also aware, where did it come from? Right.
Yeah, Oscar Wilde has this great line. Well, here's how I set it up is when I turned 50, I found my female peers, they were fretting because they saw themselves becoming their mothers.
Right.
My male friends weren't. But most males are raised more by their, at least baby boomers, we're raised more by our mothers than our dad. But, and so I always wondered, why do women fret more becoming their mothers? And then I read Oscar Wilde said, women fret becoming their mothers, men don't. That's their problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everyone who has parents, that you realize that you're a combination not only of their genetics, but just the way they look at the world
That's it.
and their habits.
Yeah.
So, but also you can sort of choose which of those habits you want to,
Yeah.
say, work with. And I when I looked at my mother, she was conscientious and she was resilient, and
Yeah.
those were good. My father was, curious and liked to travel and exercise. So I went with the things that I liked versus,
Yeah.
blaming them for picking up some of their bad habits.
Yeah. You know, it is amazing. We discussed that, and I haven't asked this question in a while, but I like is is longevity more, because it's both and you can't separate it, but is it more DNA or more lifestyle choice?
Well,
Because, yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say that I've done a lot of research and listening on all the gurus on longevity,
Yeah.
and supposedly, when you look at the research, 20% is genetics and 80% is your lifestyle.
Really? Whoa,
Yeah,
I'm glad you taught me that.
yeah.
Genetics and
20 per
80%.
20% genetics, 80% lifestyle. And but I will say that the research, especially by Neil Barzilai out of New York City, who studies centenarians,
Yeah.
is that if you come from a family where, let's say, you've got three siblings and you're all over 100 and still sharp, you have the right type of genetics that have caused that
Yeah.
longevity. Right.
Is perception reality?
I don't think so. No. And for me, I always look at humans are always so anthropomorphic about feeling they're so special, but I look at perception and realize, okay, the snake is seeing in infrared, the shark is sensing in, electrical signals in terms of just smells, and so to me, um, it really varies on what kind of sensory organs you have and what your perception is.
Yes. I love Lily Tomlin said, reality's just a collective hunch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good way yeah. It's a hunch based on your sensory systems, right?
It is. It is. Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Wow, impossible things. I don't know specifically. I mean, I look at things that, are going to probably occur in the future. It's more the when, when
Yeah.
people say, "Wow," it would be impossible, which they would say years ago, to get to another planet. And, now we're on Mars, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be impossible to turn around climate change and everything else. I think people that limit possibilities have lack of imagination and also lack of understanding of the doubling of the technology and how things can grow at a logarithmic rate.
Yeah. Sunross says the impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change. You've done a lot, Karen. Tell me, in your Karenness, being this alive, vital human, one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
Okay. The one that changed was I was highly introverted as a kid, and now I intermittently enjoy being an extrovert in terms of, getting outside my box, if you know what I mean. In fact, as an example, one of the ladies reached out to me, and this is a couple of years ago, and she said, "Oh, I heard you talk, and I know you're into health and fitness and this and that." And this woman's in her 70s, and she's a competitor in bikini. And she said, "Karen, you can compete in ultra masters. That's 60 to 70, right?" And and I thought, what, like in a sparkly little G-string like thing? You want me to compete? And then I thought, okay, Karen, I've never done this. And so I competed and won, so I'm now like a bikini champion. And that's to me very extroverted. So
Yeah.
I changed in that way. Um, what has never changed is my aptitude for curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved you saying Carolyn Casey's show, The Three C's:
Yeah,
curious, compassion, and collaborate.
right.
Amazing. I mean, immediately wanted to adapt that because the word seas can be spelled SEAS because we're all in this big ocean
Right.
and it's metaphorical. But do you know where you got that? Is that you original or do you
Well,
think you got?
that's just me. I mean, that's just how I looked at it. I gave a talk once, and I wanted to say, people have different acronyms, and I thought, well, what do I really believe in? And I didn't want too many concepts. I only wanted
Yeah.
three. And then I sort of wanted them just to have the same letter, right? So that came up into my brain. Plus, I look at the C's where you can put them all together, so it's like a lumpy little circle too.
Oh, it's amazing. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to use that the rest of my life and all my public speaking, and I'll try to credit you every time. But if I don't, believe me, I should have.
Yeah, and yeah, I that's how I've always tried to function in my life.
It is amazing, and it actually answers one of my questions that I never ask: is summarize your life in 3 words, all beginning with the same letter. So when I heard yours, I was like,
Right.
"That's ooh,
Yeah,
beautiful."
yeah. Yeah, that's what I consider, my life, and it makes the most sense to me, but also it has given me a great life too,
Yeah.
and great adventures.
What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Uh, Women, uh, because they give birth to a child, on average, have better capacity for nurturing.
Yeah.
And I didn't have children, but my husband and I mentored kids who, had a parent in prison. But I looked at the inmates literally as my children. I tried to nurture them.
Yeah. It is. It's beautiful. The pictures on your website is just, you can see it in their faces.
Yeah, they adored me actually.
Yeah.
I mean, many of them. The ones who
Yeah.
didn't get what they wanted were like little kids, like, I hate you, I hate you.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
A weakness I turned into a strength. I would say that writing, because as a doctor, you write soap notes. This is like subjective, objective assessment
Yeah.
plan. That's it. And for me to write a book, that was, I had to really turn that into something entirely different. So, and then I don't market very well. This is not my thing, but people who have read my book, a lot of people love it because they said, "Oh my God, it reads like a novel. It reads like a love story." So I get a lot of positive feedback when someone actually reads my book.
There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist." In fact, the comedian Bob Goldthwait morphed it into, "You are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." I'm curious your reaction to this line. Any thoughts? You create what you resist. And I'm not saying Karen, you, like
Right.
one creates what one resists. Any
Mhm.
thoughts on that line?
What pops into my mind is when I look at other women who have been abused by men and then keep coming up with new partners who are still abusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and yeah, that's the thing that pops up into my mind, which has always sort of floored me, but also they say they don't want that, but what
Yeah.
happens is it becomes their identity. So unless they change their identity, they attract and go for the same type of abusive person.
Yeah.
And they may
Yeah.
not realize it, but their identity is they still feel like someone who can be abused, like a victim, right?
Yeah, Karen, it's amazing because both McLuhan and Krishnamurti say violence is the human search for identity.
Yeah. Yeah, and if that's your identity that, you are an abused person, then you unfortunately tend to attract those people unless you change your identity.
Yeah. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
I hope someone who is good, otherwise I have no other ideas.
Great answer. 2, are we going to make it?
Yes, I do, but maybe not in the way people think.
Where do we put it?
We put it where it makes the most sense and which benefits the most for all.
Who's cleaning it up?
Hopefully, the people who created the mess.
5, is it serious?
It's never serious if you can find the humor in it and the upside.
Beautiful. I asked for 90 minutes. Can you go a few more over or you got to leave?
No, I don't have to leave.
Okay. Thank you so much. This is fun. There's a activist folk singer, Utah Phillips. He said, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Hopefully, individuals who or organizations who can look at and truly understand how to benefit individuals and groups for the greatest cohesiveness and collaborate in a way where it is compassionate.
Yeah. John Basil Barnhill was a socialist. He said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. In 2005, the film V for Vendetta paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears? You actually brought one up earlier, the war on drugs. You can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight. And you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So it's this thing, the war on drugs, the war on terrorism, the war on poverty. How do you handle these kind of false fears?
How I handle it is to realize people love to push war out as if there is, and they always do it with fear. And they do it with the opportunity to fight and step on people and kill. And so I think that word should always be highly suspect used in any context whatsoever. To me, the drug problem has to be approached with the 3 C's. Why?
Yes.
Why people do it, uh, be compassionate about how it's handled, and collaborate to actually help people. In some cases, drugs can help them. Uh, Nowadays, they have that interesting research on psychedelics that are
Yeah.
potentially helping people. But war has always been used in terms of fear mongering, and then people in positions of power or who want to get money or control or authority use it to push people's buttons.
Yeah. Really well put. Yeah, Frank Zappa used to talk the war on drugs. You can't have a war on drugs. You should have a war on hopelessness. Why do people take drugs?
Yeah.
Um, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would have said, don't base everything on that stupid guidance counselor who said you should be a nurse. and 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 from now on, reach out to mentors who can expand your horizons and thought processes.
Karen, how do you find peace of mind?
For me, I have a lot of peace of mind, maybe more so than the average person. Uh, but for me, I love to be out in nature, and then I love to exercise. Exercise gives me my little serotonin and dopamine hits and all the goody chemicals I could ever want.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I would not want it to be permanent. I don't believe in statues. I think it should be, like, made out of a great healthy dish and people eat it and it's gone.
Oh, that is a great answer. I love that answer. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Good that I never had, good. Boy. I'm a bit stumped on that because maybe no, I can't see that either. This is horrible. I'm not sure. I've had everything I've wanted, you know?
Yeah. I'll tell you the three answers that I get the most: fame, money, and heroin.
Oh, see, that it doesn't do anything for me, you know?
It is weird what people tell me, but
Yeah, I mean, because, if it's something good and I want it, then I'm gonna go get it.
yeah,
See what I mean? And if it's good and I don't want it, that doesn't make sense to me. It's like it
it
doesn't
doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's a
make
paradox.
sense to me.
Yeah, it's actually there's a line I love to talk about is Louis Buñuel said, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." And 90% of people go, I agree with that. And one guy says, no, that's bullshit. Because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So the cliche goes, the journey's more important than the destination. Why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey's more important?
Yeah, I've never understood why people have to have a destination. I've always just enjoyed the journey.
That's great. It's called psychogeography. The people in the 20s in Paris changed the world and they just sat at coffee houses and chilled out. And then, like Joyce said, they found an epiphany in everydayness, you know.
Yeah, they had coffee clutches.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Hmm. Well, I think the cultural shift that I'd like to see is that people are trying to look ahead and working on social problems like climate change, uh, the inequalities. When they work in those areas, that's what interests me.
Yeah. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
For me, it is to really stay vital. That means healthy
Yeah,
and relevant, because what I do not want is to be a burden to anyone or society.
yeah,
That's what it is for me.
yeah,
And when I look at the aging demographics in our country, I really want people to not retreat. I want them to really rewire and refire and
yeah,
be part of solutions that have been very sticky and have not progressed that far. For me, I have a little niche in the criminal justice arena where I can try to push some levers. And because I'm an MD, I can use some of my knowledge to inspire people to value wellness instead of going to doctors all the time. It's like, stay away from them.
yeah. You are smart. I love that because I've learned from McLuhan is turn a breakdown into a breakthrough, a rejection into a redirection. And now I got a new one from Karen. Don't retreat, refire, and rewire.
Yes. Actually, you have
That
to rewire it is which one comes first, but you got to rewire and refire, So
you are a wordsmith supreme. Those are some great words. What gives you the most optimism?
the most optimism when I meet people that have similar, let's say, interests, but also who are might trying to make a difference in the world in a positive way. That's what
Yeah,
gives me optimism.
yeah,
And I admit I tend to ratchet down watching news, which is just pushing people's emotional buttons. I
yeah.
like to learn about the positive things.
I agree. Karen, this has been so special for me. I wanted to tell you the first question. What's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yes.
And the last question is what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So, I mean, what you've taught me is so enlightening. And I want to tell you how much I thank you for this time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, I really enjoyed all your questions where my brain was going, this is trying to think like, what exactly what was that question going for?
It was really fun. And thank you so much. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever.
Well, it's an interesting thing, but hey, I hope you read my book sometime.
I will get your book and I encourage everybody to pick it up and just go to your website and your many interviews on YouTube. They're all very enlightening. Thank you so much, Karen.
Yeah, because yeah, I've gotten, well, I have had even people who have written me and said, I was always angry at this guy who killed my brother, and
Yeah.
now I can forgive, and those are the things that, yeah, I didn't really expect when I wrote the book, but I'm very glad when people can release some stuff when they experience it and see it through different eyes.
Well, I think it demonstrates the power of who you are and what you've done for your life. And then you're able to put it in a book and then that just resonates and it enables you to inspire more people to practice those 3 C's, being curious, compassion, and so much
Yeah.
collab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And I just want to share one thing with you, Jerry. It's just an aside in that, like, my husband died a couple of years ago. And so after he died, I had, a house with extra space. And one of my ex-felons who used to work for me as my clerk for my life skills course, he came out, was working in Reno, which is next to Carson City, and the rents there are so ungodly high. And so I said, well, I've got a house with a bedroom, a bathroom, and a den that I'm not really using. So he has now been my housemate for 3 years. So he doesn't have to pay room and board. And so he can get on his feet again. You see what I mean? And he has been a godsend to me
Yeah.
in regards to like helping me fix things that guys fix, which I don't know how to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's I mean, it's one of those things where people will look at me and think, "Oh, what you did this and that," but I look for I'm that optimist, and it worked out extremely well for me.
Yeah, I think humans want to make the world a better place, and you're a good example of it, that you actually put your heart and soul into it, and it inspires other people to do it too.
Right, and I am very much also a bit of a hedonist. I love, to enjoy myself too. There's some people who don't take care of themselves and just wear themselves out trying to be caregivers of others,
Yeah.
right? And I'm very attached to having that balance where I'll help, but I also I want my own, I want to be okay.
Well, I recommend the song Nature Boy by Eden Abe. Nat King Cole made it a hit. And it has a line that goes, "The greatest thing you'll ever learn is to love and be loved in return."
Yeah,
So this balance thing is so important.
very much so.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. Again, I hope we never stop talking and we keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Jerry. Bye bye. Do I get